There is a popular phrase in Nigeria right now.
Let the poor breathe.
This ceremony is in the bid to make that happen. It is the inauguration ceremony of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. Highlighting the need for revenue as government works to discharge its responsibilities to its citizens, the president emphasized the need for a sound fiscal policy environment and a fit-to-purpose tax system.
Our target is to improve Nigeria's revenue profile while making the business environment more conducive and internationally competitive. Our aim is to transform the tax system to support sustainable development, while at the same time achieving a minimum of 18% tax to GDP ratio within the next 3 years.
The committee is mandated to address the fiscal challenges facing the economy, focusing on 3 areas: fiscal governance, tax reforms, and growth facilitation.
We cannot continue to tax poverty when we should be promoting prosperity. We should no longer tax investment or production, but focus on returns, incomes, and consumption. This government will tax the fruit, but not the seeds.
Speaking with journalists afterwards, the chairman of the Presidential Committee said the mandate of the committee will include reforms across the 3 tiers of government.
That fiscal governance also says we have to ensure we have coordination in terms of within the federal government itself, and also horizontally or vertically, I should say, with sub-nationals, particularly state, but also local government. And that's exactly what we hope to be able to do.
The World Bank country director, who was present at the ceremony, spoke positively about some of the steps taken by government.
Just the fact that what His Excellency did on his first day in office, which is eliminate fuel subsidies, that already added close to 2 percentage points of GDP to government revenues. Just because otherwise Nigeria was losing about 10 trillion naira per year to PMS subsidy.
The president has mandated the committee to come up with quick reforms that can be implemented within 30 days. They also have a mandate to ensure that they come up with critical reform measures, which will come up and should be delivered within 6 months and implemented within 1 calendar year. So for the committee, their time starts now. From the Presidential Villa, Lanre Lasese, Channels Television News.
Yeah, and so the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Tax and Policy Reforms, Fiscal Policy Reform, joins us here in the studio, Mr. Taiwo Yedele. Good morning. Thank you for coming out today.
Good morning, Shembadin. Good morning, Malpe.
Good morning.
Well, yeah, as Larry said, the clock is ticking, heavy on the task, your action points, what you need to do first in 30 days, and then you also have to come up with this in 1 year, then I see a 3-year plan. So give us a broad perspective now. How are you approaching this?
Thank you very much. So, like the president said yesterday, the work of the committee is divided into 3 broad areas. One of it is fiscal governance. The second one is revenue transformation. And the third one is growth facilitation. So what do we mean by that? If you think about the fiscal governance for Nigeria, it will range from issues to do with, debt limits. Do you respect the ratio of deficit to GDP as you have in the Fiscal Responsibility Act? How do you even report the revenue that you generate? And more importantly, the quality of spending. So I can tell you I've constructed a road. Quality is not good. We spend 5 times the amount. Those things do not build trust with the taxpayers. How do you connect with monetary authorities, Another policies, economic policies, handshaking properly with fiscal policies. How do you connect within the federal government? How do you connect with subnationals? Because at the end of the day, the federal government is doing the right thing, but the local government is not. My life is still complicated as a Nigerian trying to live legitimately. So that's fiscal governance. Then revenue transformation, clearly, we need money. And the whole idea is, how do you raise revenue without increasing the burden on the poor? And for me, that seems really very clear and simple. Simple in the sense that as of today, we have what I call significant tax gap, estimated in the region of 20 trillion or even more naira. Because if you focus only just on the few major taxes, value-added tax, corporate income tax, personal income tax, there are loads of people who are not compliant, particularly middle class and the elite. Some of them are in the tax net with 1 or 2 fingers. So you pay 1,000 naira as tax when you should have paid 10 million naira. If you bring all of that into the tax net, in fact, our plan is to repeal many of the taxes that currently make doing business difficult without introducing new ones and yet collect more.
Music to the ears, go ahead.
Yes, and the other way we think that we can raise revenue is, even though our revenue collection from taxes is one of the lowest in the world, ironically, our cost of collection is one of the highest. So, and the reason for that is because you've got all manners of agencies. At the federal government alone, level alone, we had 63 MDAs that were given revenue target last year. No, actually, 2023 budget. And 2 things that will come up from that. On one hand, these agencies are being distracted from doing their primary function, which is to facilitate the economy. Number 2, they were not set up to collect revenue, so they won't be able to collect revenue efficiently. So move those revenue collection functions to the FIRS, you gain 2 advantages. The cost of collection and efficiency would improve. These guys will focus on doing their work, and the economy will benefit as a result.
If I could just get clarity on that.
Yes, please.
So does that mean that all those agencies that usually announce, well, we have what, 3 trillion, or we're targeting to collect 4 trillion, and this and that, that one shouldn't be happening anymore?
We don't want them to do that anymore. So just if you're custom, focus on trade facilitation, border protection. If you're NCC, just regulate telecommunication. You're not set up to collect revenue.
Because it makes it look as if they're in competition with the private sector.
Exactly. It can still be your revenue. We're not going into that. It can be your revenue and someone else can collect it for you. And there will be more transparency because you see what is being collected and it's accounted for properly. It's also a way of holding ourselves to account as to how we spend the money we collect from the people. So that's what you find. And then even incentives. If you look at it, we have all manners of incentives. If you do a cost-benefit analysis, some of them don't make sense anymore. Maybe they made sense 10, 20 years ago. Just rationalizing that in itself also gives you a lot of savings. So the third leg of this work, which is the growth facilitation, is we're going to be very intentional in looking at the details. They say the devil is in the detail. Exports, import, doing business locally, small business, micro, nano businesses, large ones, international investors, everyone is important. What are the impediments? Why is it difficult for you, for example, to even raise finance in the capital market? How can you ensure that if you hire labor, one of the things that the president has said is we want to create about 1 million jobs in the digital economy. And I can tell you, the tax laws as they are today, we inherited from our colonial masters. But that's not even bad enough. They also inherited it from the League of Nations over 100 years ago. The world has changed drastically since then, such that today I can sit down here in Abuja and work for a US company. We haven't met physically. I'm not working on Nigerian projects. And I earn my dollars, everybody's happy. Today, you cannot do that in Nigeria because our laws presume that if you have an employee in Nigeria, not only is that employee liable to pay tax, which is fine, the employer, wherever they may be, must come and pay taxes in Nigeria. So what the American employer will do is, if Kenya will allow me to do that without creating trouble for me, why do I hire Nigerians?
Yeah. So all of these that you highlighted, so how is it that I mean, I think the timing for the life of this committee is a year.
Yes, correct.
And a lot of these things are governance issues, both at the federal, state, and local government level. So you see that your committee is just to come up with those policies, the framework, then government go and implement. Because if you do it in 1 year and you exit, aren't you supposed to find a way to keep tabs and ensure that they are following with the intendment of those policies that you come up with?
Yeah, very good question. Yes, so I think first and foremost, we think that there's a sense of urgency in dealing with issues we have to deal with. And I have to also tell you personally, I think that if you don't do what you have to do within the first 2 years of an administration in Nigeria, you get distracted. So we set the 1 year time frame purposely. I want to demonstrate the sense of urgency. This committee is not going to be writing reports and submitting them and hope and pray that somebody would implement. No. The mandate is from day one. You come up with an idea, we discuss it with stakeholders, which could be the president, it could be NEC, the governors and governors forum, it could be anyone, joint task. But once you get the agreement, you go ahead and implement. Now, what the president wants us to do is within the first 30 days, there are those low-hanging fruits. People have generally agreed that this is a problem that you need to address, but nobody has done anything about it. Personally, for example, this is not, promising that it will be done. I think that we should suspend VAT on diesel because of we remove fuel subsidy on petrol and prices are going up. So what can we do?
Would you accept that?
No, we're going to table it before the committee.
Okay.
So those are the things we want to do within 30 days, for example.
All right.
Now, 6 months is critical tax reform. So what we do in those 6 months is we're going to be rewriting some of the laws, actually. You see executive orders, you see regulations. If it has to do with states, we go to NEC or Governors Forum, we get their buy-in. We even plan to create templates for them. For example, tax harmonization law. So every state should just have one law that covers everything collectible by local government and the state government, and it should be online and transparent. So we do that template for them, which they can just adopt, or they can adapt if they want. And then 1 year is for implementation. But the interesting thing is the 30 days, the 6 months, and 1 year will run concurrently. Now, at the end, I would agree with you, it's ambitious to do all of this in 1 year, but let's see, we want to push ourselves and see where we get to in this period of time.
Yeah, because I was just looking at the speech which you gave yesterday, and I was saying, well, big goals here. But let's take up some of the issues which you raised. You said our fiscal policies could benefit from better crafting grounded in data and evidence. So it does suggest that for many years we've just done it, without data, without evidence. How do we intend to go about, do we have to collect data first? What do we have to do first before, this framework can now start to be built? Yeah,
great question, Mark. Yes, so this, I've been involved, even though I haven't been in government until now, I've been involved with supporting government with policies and this for over a decade. And one thing I can tell you for free is people, more often than not, propose policy changes based on their own lenses. So if you have two friends and they are rich people and they are complaining about something, you just amend the law for them. If you think that banks are making a lot of profits, because two banks that have made a lot of profits, you haven't bothered about the rest, you say, let's tax them, excess profit. So I think it was Michael Deming, I'm not sure if I'm getting the name right, who said that in God we trust, all others must bring data. So this for us is so critical. We're going to be asking for data and evidence. And then we're going to be doing impact assessments. Sometimes what happens also with policies is you target the wrong taxpayer, but the incidence is with someone else. The very good example was when Donald Trump said, let's tax the Chinese. The Americans said, let's go for it. And then Donald Trump imposed import duties on items from China. It turned out the Americans were the one paying the tax. So we have to do all of that, data, evidence, impact assessment, And sufficient engagement with the people to make sure that you're not just doing it for yourself, but for the people.
I know we don't have too much time, but let me see if I could take some examples.
Okay.
Because you said you have 30 days and people need to feel some of these things.
Yes.
The banks, for instance. Now, when you do a transfer, they charge you this electronic money transfer levy. And then at the end of the month, we're charged again on account maintenance. Now, the banks, even when you use POS too, they also charge you for that particular one. So now, plus VAT at the same time in all of those transactions. So no matter how many times you do it in the month, all of those transactions are charged, VAT inclusive. So why then is it that at the end of the month, it appears as though those taxes are duplicated when they come through and then charge you, even though they tell you it's current account maintenance, they still charge all over again those that you have charged. Even when you go to, say, the common man, for instance, you go to a restaurant, you eat, you swipe. They charge you for the POS transaction plus VAT. Then they charge you for that transaction with your bank for that particular one. Then at the end of the month, they still charge you for account maintenance. Now, those companies themselves to pay some form of tax. So it appears as though something needs to be done about all of those. Is that part of what you're considering?
Yes, it is. So one thing that the president also said, which I think is important to just remind people, is we do not want to tax poverty. We do not want to tax investment. We do not want to tax production. Instead of poverty, help people and businesses create prosperity and share in it by way of taxes. Instead of taxing investment, wait for the returns on the investment. Instead of taxing production, wait for the consumption. And then don't tax, the president said, we're not going to be taxing seed, we'll tax fruits. So what that means is in the design of financial transactions, one, you need to even ask yourself, if I'm going to give you cash, today I won't pay any stamp duties or bank charges. So you're encouraging me to come within the financial system, then you impose, in my view, like away. Penalties, So this is not something that is entirely within our purview, but that's why we have the central bank involved in this project. So we're going to be speaking to them. We're going to be having engagement with the banks as well. So first, in terms of the taxes, is there a way we can establish thresholds? And we did that already with stamp duties. It could be something that says, based on data, I'm not going to call any numbers now. Based on this data, people transacting at this threshold are poor. So exempt them from the taxes. And then it has to be between the CBN and the banks to then say, why do we need to charge them? Sometimes you see SMS charges, say, but I don't want the SMS, but you charge me, and then the amount is so much at the end of the month. So those issues we would also look into them.
Another example is that, for instance, some states came up with this policy saying, well, the taxes they collect is federal tax. So they came up with theirs, maybe tax on consumption. They say, well, if you buy any food or anything, you have to pay tax. Because they claim that the ones that are collected generally is for the federal. But we also do know, when FIRS gets these taxes, or when states collect taxes remit to FIRS, at the end of the day, it gets into Federation account.
Yes.
And then it's shared, and states collect it. So when states collect that, they still collect the ones they get from their states. Whereas they claim that one goes to the federal. So are we going to look into that as well?
Yes, certainly. In fact, this is a major area of focus for us. And it's one of the reasons why we said we shouldn't call the FIRS the Federal Inland Revenue Service. It presupposes that they collect revenue for the federal government, whereas they actually collect revenue for the federation. VAT, for example, 85% of it goes to state and local government. Stamp duty goes only to state government. But yet, when you do the narrative, it's easy to say, oh, the center is too strong, we need more powers at the state. The people would not know that you're sharing in that amount, and then you now impose your own again, and then punishing the people in the process. So what we plan to do is first to try and understand what the issues are, because in a way, some of the states also have legitimate concerns. I remember when Rivers State said, I'm here awarding contracts to build roads, some states are not doing anything, then you collect my VAT and you go and share it with everyone. So we'll address those issues. And then we also ensure that the way we even present, taxes that are collected, maybe we should just put next to it who is sharing it, right? And then how do you get states to buy into, if you have a VAT, you don't introduce your own consumption tax. Interestingly, part of the mandate of our committee is to actually draft bills to amend the Constitution itself.
Oh, I see.
Because some of these issues actually emanate from the Constitution, not being very clear.
Wow, and some people say Constitution, that's a very long journey.
Yes.
You know how long the Constitution takes to amend.
Yeah.
But, you've talked about how you're going to be looking at things horizontally, that's among federal government agencies, and vertically as well amongst the 3 tiers. Now, horizontally, some people will say that, but we introduced a treasury, but you talked about how you hoped that there will be more harmonization and more efficiency with the collection of taxes. The introduction of the Treasury single account, how effective was that in terms of trying to show, just which agency was collecting what, and, perhaps in terms of revenue, were there any benefits to some of the goals which you're looking at here that was introduced from the Treasury single account?
The answer is yes. The TSA was a step in the right direction. We realized at that point that there were MDAs with over 200 bank accounts. Nobody even knew how many bank accounts they had. I was speaking to a commissioner for finance of one of the states. Nobody knew how many bank accounts they had. And that was bad enough. So Treasury single account was progress of some sort. We haven't really built on it, in my view, since then, because you need to then go beyond the fact that you have the TSA. First, you need to deal with the exceptions and exemptions here and there. We need to get to a point where you don't make exemptions for anyone. I know that one of the problems we have is that you can get a budget for your ministry or department or agency, and it will not be funded. So you're afraid that if you have a crisis, just imagine an NPC, you need to put off fire on a vessel or something. You may not get the money on time. So everyone is then trying to make sure they, ring fence their money separately. I think we can deal with those issues. And beyond that is the transparency of even reporting what is it that flows into the TSA, including how that's been spent. If you consider, for example, that in the CBN Act, there's a provision that the CBN should give its surplus to the federal government twice a year, 75% of it. And then over the past 3-4 years, the amount of interest we've paid on ways and means alone is over 3 trillion. I haven't seen the flow back of that amount to the federal government. So some of these issues are things we need to then do beyond the TSA. So the TSA will help our work, but there is a lot more that we need to do to ensure that these things work effectively and they are sustained.
Do you sense that there could be any pushback when you look? When you look at the fact that you talked about incentives, the fact that agencies that have hitherto collected monies on behalf of the federal government have also been incentivized. Do you sense that you could also come up against a pushback from agencies of government?
Yeah, there would be pushback. I don't think it would only be agencies of government. I think there'll be pushback from any stakeholders that is benefiting anything and you're trying to, take it away from them. They'll push back. What we're trying to do is to get everybody to see the bigger picture. If I'm successful in a country that is struggling, I'm a failure, right? Because you don't even feel safe. So you see houses in Lagos and some of them look like the prison yard. So what if you then look at the long term? Because long term, actually medium to long term, everyone will benefit from what we want to do now. So the narrative for us is not that we're coming to take away what belongs to you. It's to find a more efficient way of doing it. And if we all agree that there are issues that do not benefit anyone, let's agree to take them off. If you have over 60 different taxes officially, unofficially well over 100, and only about 7 to 8 give us 99% of our revenue, federal, state, or local government, it just seems like common sense to me to say, why don't you repeal all those taxes that are creating more headache than yielding revenue result for governments?
All right, we'll go to a quick break and then we'll be back and get a few more questions in.
thank you for staying with us. Well, Dr. Ide, let me, if this was a public hearing, I'll tell you to pick up your pen and paper and start taking notes of the questions that I want to ask you. But we are really, pressed for time because there are a number of things just come to mind. You've talked about the things that you want to do in the area of taxes, harmonization and all of that, speaking to the 3 tiers of government, federal, state, and local governments. SMEs have claimed that they pay all kinds of taxes, levies, duties, and all of that, all across the nation, particularly when they are moving interstate. You may have also seen that video that made the rounds of someone calculating up to between 30 and 60 levies and duties on the way across states. If you can hazard a guess, you've been doing this for more than 10 years, how many taxes, levies, duties, regulations do nano, micro, and small businesses pay in the country in one way or the other? And how many is your committee harmonizing them to?
Great question, Ayo. I wish I have the answer to your question. I can tell you authoritatively, no one in Nigeria, no one, not a single person knows how many taxes businesses pay. We did an exercise some years back for manufacturers, and the way we did it, which is going to be similar to what we plan to do now again, we just asked manufacturers to tell us the taxes they pay and provide the evidence that they pay the taxes, so they are also not just making it up. And we counted in one state 197 different taxes and levies. The video, I don't know whether you're referring to the same video. There's a video of a man who was trying to transport, I think there were food items, from one state to the other. And this guy counted 72 different levies and fees that he had to pay, of course. And then we are surprised that food is expensive. The sad thing is that even all those collections, you'll be lucky if 10% of it will get to government. Wow. So there's a burden on the people without the benefits of paying those taxes. So we don't know how many taxes there are. Officially, there's somewhere around 65 to 70, based on what we call the approved levies and taxes, law. So let's work with that. Now, SMEs are mostly, sometimes I think they're just people who are hustling, the way we say it in Nigeria. If you think about nano, micro, and small businesses, they're really, when we say the numbers of MSMEs in Nigeria, and you hear all these 40 million, actually, about 99-point-something% are the micro, nano, and small. The medium are really very few. So Nigeria's strategy in terms of taxing the informal sector and small businesses, in my view, is counterproductive because you are chasing people who can barely survive, just keeping ends, making ends meet, and you're asking them to pay you a lot of taxes. What you find in most countries is you establish your threshold for exemption. If you use data to determine what the poverty line is today, and let's say that poverty line is, if you earn anything less than 80,000 naira, you live below the poverty line. The common sense thing to do is not to ask you to then pay tax to government and then focus on the top. South Africa last year, 2022, collected over 20 trillion naira equivalents from personal income tax alone. And more than half of these amounts was by top 1% of their society. Just imagine our top 1% just paying that 10 trillion. That would be more than 5 times what we've ever collected in Nigeria from personal income tax, despite being almost 4 times
Dr.
the population of South Africa.
So in other words, my apologies. Yes. If we are going by the number you gave, about 70-something taxes that are already being paid, is that number going to remain, or are you going to harmonize it down? That's the second leg of that question that you haven't answered. You may also please add the answer to this one. You've just referenced it in a way. What's the percentage of Nigerians that pay taxes? And is there a plan to expand that bracket? What's the incentive for paying taxes?
Yes, so to your first question, yes, we have a plan, a very ambitious one. And don't hold me to this, it's a plan, it's not a promise. Is that when we are done, all the taxes at the federal government level, state and local government level will be single digits. In other words, should not be more than 9. And we really want to push for this. It might be something that you achieve progressively over time, but that's the target for us. So all those 70-something, unofficially over 100, should come down to less than 10. To the second part of your question, how many Nigerians are paying taxes? Not many, at least paying directly to government, that gets into government coffers. A lot of Nigerians are paying informal taxes. I'll even say extortion in some cases. Beyond that also is that even when you go into the official tax net, let's say there's something called official tax net, in my view, you find a lot of people there, majority actually, shouldn't be taxed. They should be there only for information, data collection, and economic planning. So you have mostly the wrong people in the tax net, and the people that need to be there are either not there at all, or they're just there with one finger, like I said earlier on. If we take, for example, the fact that we're trying to administer interventions to cushion the effects of fuel subsidy removal, what most countries would do is, because they have the intelligence about what you're doing, your behavior on your phone alone, right? You load 200 naira in a whole month, and you flash people every time. You don't have a bank account. It tells me that you're poor. So you can get a credit directly into your bank account if you have one. If you don't, you get it on your phone, and you can use it for, say, food stamps. So this actually goes beyond just collecting revenue and harmonizing taxes. It also goes into economic planning. Beyond the number of taxes we want to reduce, we also want to reduce the number of revenue agencies trying to collect one tax or levy here and there.
Interesting. I'd like to follow up on that one, but I'll just leave it and manage our time. Dr. Oyedele, I'd like to talk about the concern of manufacturers and economic experts alike, who often bemoan that disconnect between fiscal policy and monetary policy. And one of the contradictions that they identify in that space is the ban on the 43 items from accessing Forex in the I&E window. I wonder if it's within the jurisdiction of the Tax Reform Committee to take a look at that and perhaps lift the ban on some of those items.
Yeah, brilliant question. Yeah, so we haven't had sufficient, coordination and handshake between the fiscal policies and monetary policies. The reason why the central bank created those lists of 43 items that are prohibited from accessing FX in the official market is because they feel like we don't have enough foreign currency. Why are you importing toothpick? Of course, that's a valid concern. But should the answer be that you stop them from accessing the FX market? I don't think so, because what that does is that it creates demand in the parallel markets, and therefore you have a margin or a premium between the parallel market and the official market, which then goes back to the same problem we didn't want to have, that can lead to arbitrage. What you should do is to allow everyone, so long as what you're doing is legitimate, to go to the official foreign exchange markets to bid. And for the things you want to discourage, you then impose higher import duties on them. So I still get the same results of discouraging you from importing toothpick without hitting up the foreign exchange markets. And if you do that as well, the other thing you would achieve is that the parallel market will stop being relevant. It will become a black market, which means that's a market to buy FX for illegitimate transactions like, corruption, proceed, trafficking, drugs, and whatever the rate is. If it goes to 2,000, nobody cares. Many countries don't reference their black market because it's irrelevant. But if you push legitimate transactions to that market, you give it legitimacy, and then people reference it. So we think that it's important for us to have that coordination between fiscal and monetary policy to address some of these problems like the one you raised.
Yes, indeed, Dr. Oyedele, and you're valid, about that concern to discourage the accessing of Forex for items that can be locally manufactured. But there are others, particularly some manufacturers, who say that they're local fabricators of certain raw materials, and they need to access, Forex to import those items. But foreign, investors who also do business in that area are allowed to access Forex So I wonder if that disconnect can be addressed, and particularly if there will be a handshake between members, officials of the Ministry of Finance and the CBN, such that they are going to be on the same page in looking at all of those items sufficiently for more informed policy decisions.
Yes, that's what we expect. In fact, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria are a member of this committee. So also is the central bank. So we're going to be discussing these issues together and say what's the best way forward for our country. Of course, it won't be right for you to deny manufacturers efforts to bring in inputs unless you think that those inputs are available in terms of the right quality and quantity in Nigeria. I think, one of the, my personal belief is you should not discriminate, against investors unless you are deliberately trying to protect your vulnerable sectors of the economy. Like we heard on social media, I don't know whether it's true recently, that people now import direct from China. I said, why would anybody do that, for God's sake? So that is something I can ban if I have the powers. I'll ban the importation, not even impose levies. Don't import direct to Nigeria. Let people do it, because you see a lot of families and households depend on that. We should be the one doing that and exporting it to the rest of the world, not the other way around.
Let our direct factory here breathe.
Yeah, let our direct factory here breathe.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, we're going to see unification of taxes and levies, local government, state, and federal government, such that, they all know who is to collect what and what kind of taxes or levies are to be collected. Will that happen?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. Constitutionally, you cannot compel states and local government to do anything when it comes to their taxing right. What we want to do is to put up a framework that, creates an incentive for them to do what we've agreed that we'll do, and in a way also introduce some consequences for when they go outside of that. Details are going to be worked out later, but we are confident that this should work. Because sometimes what you find is one state will say, oh, it's a PDP government, it's an APC government, and they start doing their own thing. This is a national assignment. It has nothing to do with politics and political interest.
One more thing before we go. Are we going to, is it within your committee's purview? For instance, we know that banks always tell us that, oh, your account is dormant, you need to do something about that, but we also know that when you then go in and transact, then they activate the those monthly charges and everything. It goes back to the banks. Are we likely to see a unification of all accounts? I know you did say something about name and ensuring that that platform is there. So will we see a scenario wherein people, whatever account you have, individuals, for instance, everything comes on the same platform, such that if it's there, if you're utilizing an account, everything cannot be said to be dormant?
Yeah. I've always wondered myself why, you have a savings account, you have a current account, and then they say your savings account is dormant because you haven't used it. And you are the same one person who's been using the other account. So I'll make a note of this. This is not one of the things we were looking at. And then we have that conversation with the monetary authorities to see how can we just simplify it. I know we made a lot of progress over the years. I remember the days when you could only withdraw from the branch where you opened your bank account, yes. So, yeah, I'm sure that's something that we should be able to address.
All right, we wish you the best as we go on this matter, because we need to see transparency even in tax collection, so that they don't come and slam you, well, you didn't pay this, you have to pay this, and you have no option, no choice. So we're looking to see all of those harmonized, so it's a lot easier for people to pay taxes. Thank you for coming on, Dr. Taiwo Udele, Chairman, Presidential Committee on Tax and Fiscal Policy Reforms.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, back in just a moment. We're on to health now. The NARD matter, that is up next. Stay on with us.